Hi, this is Matt Continetti of the Weekly Standard and the K Street Gang.
Hi, this is Eve Fairbanks of the New Republic magazine. Hi, Matt.
And hi, Eve. How are you?
Good. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, and welcome to Blogging Heads. I understand this is your inaugural appearance.
It is my inaugural appearance. Thank you for the good wishes, and don't run over me with a Mack truck.
I'll try not to.
Okay.
And how does it feel? How does it feel to be participating in what is an internet phenomenon?
Oh, I'm overwhelmed. What can I say? I feel like Susan Sarandon at the Oscars. Excited to be doing it the day before Thanksgiving. I think Bush pardons his turkey today. And I read on the White House website that after the turkey is pardoned, it is flown first class to Disney World.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, let's just hope it's not flown first class to Alaska, because we know what they do to turkeys there.
Right.
Yeah.
This is an affront to the American people, I think, though. In this season of pain, he ought to be pardoning like a small broiler chicken and flying it coach, wouldn't you say?
That's true. But it is a season, everybody has turkeys, so. This has been a big week, of course, for the president-elect. You mentioned the current occupant of the Oval Office, but these days it seems as though
I have to say, I know in my heart that if Obama were president right now, he would slaughter that turkey himself, give thanks, and feed 5,000 people.
Well, no, wouldn't Obama have the loaves and fishes, right? Wouldn't he just multiply those and feed all the hungry that way, right?
It's Thanksgiving, though. You can multiply the turkey, too. His powers are...
Yeah, the turkey and pumpkin pie. That's what his Thanksgiving miracle would be.
Pecan.
So we have the current occupant of the Oval Office, Bush. We have the incoming occupant of the Oval Office, Obama. And sometimes it feels as though we have two presidents. Sometimes it feels as though we have one president, Obama. And then Eugene Robinson points out in the Washington Post yesterday that sometimes it feels like we have no president. But I suppose we should talk a little bit about the incoming one, Obama, who has been having quite a week. You know, he kind of stayed out of the limelight there after his election. He only had that one press conference. But so far this week, he's had three. And really rolling out his economic team, beginning last Friday with the purposeful leaking of Tim Geithner's name for Treasury Secretary.
Right.
So what is the scene over in the New Republic? I know Noam Schreiber, your senior editor there, has been very excited about the selection of Tim Geithner for Treasury Secretary, and Laura Summers is going to chair the White House Economic Council. Is everybody abuzz in your offices? Is everyone excited?
Yeah, I would say so. I think Noam called them a dream team, and that it was like, our fantasy, or his fantasy, that Summers and Geithner, that they would find a place for both of them, because obviously it had been thought that either one or the other had to win out for Treasury Secretary, and yeah, very, very excited. And I'm sort of interested, in the mood over where you are. I remember that a few of the things that you wrote right before the election, and one of them being that, you wrote this, I think, a couple weeks before Obama was elected, but it looked like the momentum was really taken off. It's time to face facts. In-your-face liberalism is about to make a comeback, and this time it will be on steroids.
Right.
But on the other hand, people have been saying, and I think Eugene Robinson said this yesterday, I know Richard Cohen said it on that same op-ed page, that some of these appointments, Geithner, there's a lot of continuity from the Bush administration, and obviously keeping Gates in, and Hillary's perceived to be sort of a centrist foreign policy pick. So, what do you think? Is in-your-face liberalism back when one looks at the cabinet that Obama's picking out? And
no, I will say I've been very pleasantly surprised with the cabinet pick so far from Obama. It seems like he's making some real reasonable choices. And Obama always said, "What's that?"
Who do you like best?
Well, I don't. I'm not an expert in any of these things. I'm a journalist, but Lawrence Summers has been a guy who, even when he was Treasury Secretary under Clinton, and when he was at Harvard, even despite the controversies that accompanied him there, he's always struck me as an extremely brilliant man who has a respect for markets and but is also aware of what government's ability to intervene at times. So I have to say he's probably the most impressive guy that they've named so far. Bob Gates also is someone who I've a little bit worried about in 2006 when he was appointed because he was associated with the Baker-Hamilton Commission. He's known as a realist, but he has become
HW guy, right?
He was a total HW Bush 41 guy, right, which I was skeptical of, but he's come around to be a greater reformer of the Defense Department than Don Rumsfeld ever was. He's been one of the best defense secretaries in my memory, which admittedly is short. But he's also a guy who's committed to the concept of the long war. That is, this idea that the United States needs to kind of reconfigure its defense priorities in order to combat these insurgencies that we see springing up around the world. And we were able to successfully do that in Iraq. Now the challenge is how do we deal with it in Afghanistan. But Gates has been very good at reforming the department, kind of telling no to the chiefs who want to invest so much money in these kind of pie-in-the-sky weapons programs. He wants to put more boots on the ground and expand our ground forces. So I'd say Summers and Gates are the two I like the best. To defend my article, which
it's all coming up
very
roses.
much aware
it's all
of,
coming
though.
up roses now. You're amazed by Obama, right? I told you it's a miracle.
In-your-face liberalism is coming back. It's just maybe not going to be at the Obama White House. It's going to be on Capitol Hill.
Okay.
And which is
Pelosi
to the left of
and her
Obama.
ilk.
Yeah, Pelosi and her friends.
Right. And
the Democratic caucuses are to the left of Obama, I think, and to the left of the country.
You think the Democratic caucuses are to the left of Obama?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, based on what their preferred solutions to a lot of these things, if you compare that to the rhetoric from Obama, I do think they're to the left of Obama, and certainly on national security. I know there are plenty.
It's an amazing thing to say, I think, because, if you look at who the freshmen that were elected this year, I guess there's 26 of them, or there's still some races open. These are the Democratic freshmen. And then the 30 or so that were elected in 2006, so many of them were elected in districts where McCain won. In other words, in these red districts, these old Bush districts.
Yes.
And
yes, you're right.
I was looking yesterday, actually, for a single district that Obama won that is controlled by a Republican, other than the Omaha. And I'm sure there is one, but I could not find it. So simply on, the sort of red-blue spectrum, you have all of these blue dogs, all of these pretty conservative, Heath Schuler-esque, Travis Childers-esque young Democrats. That really seems like that's where the weight of the caucus
who's the Speaker of the House?
Who's the Speaker of the House?
Who are
Liz
deputies who just took over the Energy Committee? What's that? Yeah, the Speaker. And you have Henry Waxman now pushing out Dingell. In the Senate, you've got Harry Reid, Durbin, Schumer. So I agree with you completely that a lot of the Democrats that were elected in the past two cycles, 06 and 08,
right,
are coming from red districts or formerly red districts. They are blue dogs, many of them. But I think the experience of the last Congress was that the blue dogs roll over very quickly for what Nancy Pelosi, who is an extremely effective Speaker of the House, what she sets as her priorities. And so that's how I would argue that the Congress is to the left of Obama. I'll give you another example of why in-your-face liberalism is coming back,
sure,
which is all indications I've seen is a top domestic policy priority of the White House and of the Congress is going to be a health care reform bill, which I think is going to spawn a lot of debate. And it's going to be, again, a basic, binary issue. Is it going to be, do you want a more government public solution to the health insurance problem, the health insurance system, or do you want to try to kind of get to a market-based competitive approach? And so there you have, but of course the people in power are all for the former and not so much for the latter. So I think that's where you'll see a kind of a progressivism kind of idea that the way to run the system is through, educated bureaucrats and whatnot who are going to make these choices for people, that's where you'll see it making a comeback.
Yeah, and I think, you have a point. What did Rahm say? And this was written up by Jonathan Weissman in Wall Street Journal, but when he talked to that group of executives or CEOs, he said, we're in this economic time, and that could lead some people to desire really minor reforms, don't make any big shocks, no big programs, et cetera. And he said, the challenge is still out there to do healthcare, to do these larger programs. I'm not going to apologize for the flaming liberalism of a healthcare program and the in-your-face on steroids. On the other hand, I do think, look, in the 110th Congress, there was much more pressure. There'll be maybe an equal amount of pressure, but sort of perceived pressure on some of these conservative Democrats to go with the flow and go with the Democratic majority because they were pushing against Bush. And I think what you're going to see is some of the unity of that Democratic majority now that they have this supermajority, in terms of all branches, two branches of the government. That people are going to be factions are going to be stretching their wings a little bit and not necessarily wanting to go along just to achieve this tenuous unity and control that they had in the past. Their control's not so tenuous now, so you have people saying, well, I want my way. We're in power big time now. And the other thing I think is that when you look at Rahm, and I'm interested in what you think of Rahm, but he is the shepherd of these blue dogs in Congress. He is their patron. He's the one who made it possible for them for the Democratic majority to expand into these red areas. And in the past, and he's a master tactician, he's a strategist, but he has been so encouraging of these guys like Keith Schuler or Travis Childers, these very conservative Democrats, to do what they need to do, vote how they need to vote in order to kind of reflect their constituencies. And he encouraged, I believe, Schuler to make some proposals and push some things forward on immigration that were more conservative. Childers, he let take the lead on a kind of anti-gun control legislation. And so he is someone who's now the liaison, essentially, between Congress and Obama's administration, who has a lot of sympathy for these blue dogs and, hasn't in the past, even if that's where his heart ideologically is, been such a strategic friend to the progressives and the in-your-face liberals. So in terms of someone in Obama's administration...
Clearly that phrase got under your skin there a little bit. That's why I write it.
Yeah, that was provocative.
Rahm Emanuel. I think he's extremely smart, Paul. I think it's fascinating to see. Obama is unique, obviously, for so many reasons. One way he's unique is he's really the first president we're going to have that's the product of an urban machine since Harry Truman, right? And he's taking a lot of the folks that are also part of that machine, part of Cook County politics, like Rahm Emanuel or his senior advisor Valerie Jarrett. He's taking them with him to the White House. It's a different kind of crew than the Arkansas Mafia that Clinton brought, or the Georgia folks that Carter brought, or the Texas Mafia
down-home country people.
It's a different. They're much more. They're much more cutthroat. I think they're much more effective in a lot of ways. I mean, the thing about machines is, if you're a good government type, you don't like them because there's a lot of corruption and whatnot. A lot of favors being traded. On the other hand, the reason that voters like machines is that they're extremely effective at satisfying constituent needs and making government work. But also more important, I think, for the machines is making government necessary for people, and therefore then making it work and then getting votes that way. And so you're going to have basically a machine operation in the White House. And this is why I think if I were Nancy Pelosi, I would have been very disturbed by the Rahm Emanuel pick, simply because it was a clear sign, to me anyway, who is not Nancy Pelosi, but she's a smart person too. It's a clear sign that Obama is going to try to get around the congressional leadership. He's going to try to use Rahm Emanuel and his congressional liaison staff to go directly to the members, try to whip the members that way, try to use these lists, if they can do it legally or however they're going to do the name lists and the fundraising stuff.
Illegally, because it's wrong.
Yeah,
right?
or illegally. And they're going to, that's how they're going to manipulate the caucus. So if I were Pelosi, I would have been a little bit upset. And that's why I think there was so much, the other great fight is the Waxman-Dingell fight, which there you have a clear ally of Pelosi, who's taken over this committee. He is a total liberal on these issues of climate change. And that's, I think, as someone who reports on Congress, I'd be interested to hear kind of your response to this hypothetical, which is, say Waxman's committee passes out a major cap and trade bill next year that, would in effect raise energy prices. Would you see the Blue Dogs, the people like Schuler and his crew, the Jim Coopers, are they going to fall in line, or are they going to decide, my constituents in Tennessee, or North Carolina, they don't want to see this happen? Will they vote against the caucus? What do you see happening there?
That's a great hypothetical. I think with the Waxman-Dingell fight, the outcome of that, I was actually waiting around, skulking around the Cannon office building while they were debating, and then and sort of chatting with the other journalists there, guys from Politico, these very plugged in, like Congressional Quarterly guys, and they were pretty surprised by that outcome, which surprises are incredibly rare, as you know, on the Hill. I mean, it's always, these votes are counted, it's known, And I think that one of the unknowns were the Blue Dogs and these younger Democrats. And I remember a guy that I covered, a new Blue Dog, or he wants to be a Blue Dog. He's desperate to be a Blue Dog. I'm not sure if he is yet, but his name is Frank Cradaville. He's a freshman, or an incoming freshman from a district that voted 62% for Bush in Maryland. Wow. And, quite a sort of conservative Democrat in some ways. So I know him a little bit, and he walked out to use his cell phone, walked out of these deliberation rooms, and I said, "Yo, Frank, is it true that the Blue Dogs are kind of going to be the spoilers here for Waxman because their politics are more conservative? They would seem to back a more Dingell-esque, slow approach." And he said, he didn't want to tip the hand, but he said, it's really split. It's totally split. And that surprised me and the people around me because I expected them to be more uniformly behind Dingell in terms of policy. But it shows how, I think the idea that Waxman put forward that he was, that people want change. They voted for change. They voted for radical or innovative, not use the loaded word radical, but or drastic kind of new solutions and new ideas and new approaches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, that even can sort of, that impulse can trump some of these policy concerns. So, that was kind of a first litmus test for these Blue Dogs, I guess, and they certainly didn't bring Waxman's challenge down. I'm not sure it's clear. The ballot is secret, so... But on the other hand, I think it could depend a little bit on how well conservative Republicans in the House can organize. In the past few cycles, their record in that regard has not been very good. They've been big losers as far as pushing their agenda to the voters, at least. On the other hand, and what you think of these guys, I'd be interested in, but people who are these strong fiscal conservatives, and they're kind of the ones with the energy in the House Republican caucus, like Jeb Hensarling, Paul Ryan, John Shadegg and Mike Pence, some of these Republican Study Committee, spending moratorium, earmark moratorium, guys, and I've been talking to some of them for a story that I've been doing, and they're feeling a little bit bummed because of the outcome of November. On the other hand, they want to rally, and they want to they're interested in in order to oppose some of these big programs like health care. They realize that they can't do it on their pure numbers in Congress alone. They have to rally people outside Washington to basically start flooding these Blue Dogs phones with angry calls about these programs, sending emails, whatever. And it's almost a kind of prototype like you saw with the Senate's immigration fight about a year and a half ago, where looked like it was going to pass. People were pushing it through. It was a compromise legislation. It had liberal elements to it. And then you had just a few real conservative rabble-rousers, essentially. I mean, just serious conservatives in the Senate, like Jim DeMint, who basically riled up the talk shows and kind of used the internet in order to activate a lot of opposition to this within the public, that then shut down the Senate website and drowned. And then you had a lot of senators who were more moderate, but who just felt like they couldn't, they had to go home to their constituents and they could not vote for this and stay alive and not get lynched when they went home. And so that's kind of, I think it depends on how well, to some degree, conservatives in Congress are able to really throw their weight around with the help of some of, radio, some of their media, etc.
Let me, I think that's an interesting point. Let me kind of go through why I think, though, that the policy battles of the next 2 years aren't going to look like the policy battles of the past 2 years. There are plenty of superficial differences, of course. Different president, in 2006, in 2006, of course, the first time the immigration fight was fought, the Republicans were still in Congress. And they got kicked out, and then we replayed that fight in 2007 under Democratic control.
Right.
And, of course, as you point out, the same thing happened, this idea of populist outrage, stuff like that. More broadly, though, and remember, there was also angry phone calls about energy prices this past summer.
Yep.
People flooding the Capitol Hill switchboards on drill, baby, drill, that sort of thing.
Thank you for getting it right. Sarah Palin would be proud. What did I say? It's drill, drill. No, it's drill,
drill, baby, drill. There's so many ways to drill. There was a lot of anger over the Dubai port steal in the late winter, early spring of 2006. Again, that sort of thing. Here's why I don't think there's going to be much anger over the next 2 years. And
I thought liberals were angry.
What's that?
I thought liberals were angry, especially liberals on steroids. Doesn't that make you even angry?
Liberals were angry about the war. Angry about the war, but that's also not going to be an issue.
Okay.
So here's why people aren't going to be angry. People will be on steroids, absolutely, but people won't be angry.
Okay.
The reason they won't be angry is all the issues that drove our politics for the past 2 years. Three of them: the collapse of the Bush presidency, the war in Iraq, and the kind of sense of, basically a sense of public impotence. Nothing can happen. These guys in charge are trying to, screw us all with selling our ports to foreign companies and, amnestying 12 million people and yada, yada, yada. Those three things are all gone. And what they've been replaced by is Obama, who is just, when you take the temperature of people and how they react to Obama, a very small minority of conservatives actually actively dislike the man. In my experience, maybe I just don't know many conservatives. I know personally, I like the man a whole lot. I just disagree with him.
Conservatives were angry about Obama, or was that a sort of liberal misperception? Like when you had the coverage of these rallies, and I think it was debunked that someone actually yelled, "Kill him." That was a little over the top.
Yeah, I think that was.
Well, there was, and when McCain gave his concession speech, there was a lot of booing of Obama and so forth. I thought, so you're saying conservatives are, but conservatives are not angry about it.
I don't think a majority of them are. Put it that way.
Well,
I think a small minority. I think a small minority of conservatives. Because remember, a lot of conservatives didn't even vote this year.
Yep.
Right. So I think a minority, maybe a plurality of conservatives actively dislike the guy. I know for one, I like him. I just disagree with it. He's different than Bush, in which Bush, like Sarah Palin, is a polarizer. You either love him or you hate him. And then at the end of those things that polarize, somehow they have a way of making everybody hate them. But in any case, so that's different. Iraq is no longer an issue. I mean, it's just not. It's fallen down to, 6% of people were basing their vote on it, according to the exit polls. America is winding down its commitments there. It's not going to be an issue anymore. The war, for all intents and purposes, if it's not over already, it's going to be over in the next couple of years. And it's been replaced by this ginormous, to use a word that's maybe not on blogging has a lot, this ginormous economic crisis.
The more ginormous uses, the better.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And so you have this ginormous economic crisis that no one really knows what's going on or what to do. And so on the one hand, the right is completely confused, right? I mean, there's no... You talk to the guys that you mentioned, the Mike Pences of the world, the Paul Ryans, the John Shaddicks. They're all nice guys, but they don't have a clue how to solve this or how to deal with this. I mean, and their knee-jerk responses to low...
Fox News Sunday?
I did not this week.
I can't say I'm a usual watcher, but I caught John Boehner. I have a peculiar interest in a session with John Boehner, and he was on Fox News Sunday, and he has a sort of genius for maintaining his own power in the House, but he, just as an aside, I mean, it was really unfortunate. Chris Wallace asked him something like, well, here's the million-dollar question. How does the GOP get back on its feet? What's the vision? And I think his answer was, and this is a paraphrase, but not really, new ideas for a new time, and you kind of bury your head in your hands. So yeah, I think conservatives are confused.
Well, just quickly, I mean, of course, his answer, I did read this. Boehner's answer to the economic crisis was cut the capital gains tax, which, I mean, as a policy measure, independent of this ginormous financial crisis, I would support. But you're not going to solve this problem by cutting the capital gains tax. That's not the problem. Right. So you have that on the one hand. You have this economic crisis that is confusing everybody, but everyone wants solved. On the other hand, you also have consequence. You have two consequences that come from this economic crisis that are going to lower the temperature of our politics further. One of them is that energy, for the time being, is no longer a big issue because of the deflationary effects. So, we got cheap gas again. We got $2 gas again in Virginia, where I live. So, all of a sudden, you're not going to have people flooding the Capitol Hill saying, drill, baby, drill, because no one's complaining about gas prices. And the second thing is, the immigrants are leaving. Mickey Kaus had an item on this. If you're looking at emergency room visits, anecdotally, in some of the preliminary numbers, emergency room visits are dropping. And that's a consequence of immigrants leaving because there are no jobs anymore. So, of course, the anger that you have that manifests itself in ugly ways, I think, on the right about illegal immigration is going to die down just because there aren't going to be any more illegal immigrants. So you're going to have this very weird moment in our politics, I think, for the next 2 years, where basically everybody is a little bit quieter than usual. And it's funny how often politics...
Obama.
What's that?
It's the Pax Obama.
It is the Pax Obama, and it's always funny to me, anyway, how the character of the president changes the character of our politics. And there's something about Bush, I think it's fair to say, his strange mix of kind of insecurity and arrogance is, I think, how Ross Douthat put it once.
He's so blissful, too,
What's that?
He's so blithe and blissful, and it's like everything's freaking rolling off of him. That can be infuriating, It's like...
Were you talking about Bush or Obama?
Bush.
Oh, Bush. Yeah. That's an interesting, that gets people very angry. And it makes other people kind of insecure and arrogant when they're having these debates. Now, Then you look at Barack Obama, who is never flustered, is almost thoughtful to a fault. I mean, when he speaks, he's so deliberate about what he's going to say. It sometimes is a weakness, I think. And it also can be extremely boring. But that's kind of a good thing, right?
He's very on the one hand, on the other hand.
Right.
I was so struck by his acceptance speech, or his victory speech, whatever you call it, the night that he won. And this was also true of his convention speech accepting the nomination, is how grave he looked, and somber. And on the one hand, my mother, who's quite conservative and not the world's hugest Obama fan, said, she found it jarring, and she said, this guy's just, won the nomination as the first African-American nominated by a major party for the greatest office in the land, and he doesn't look happy. He doesn't look like it's something he dreamed of. He just looks like, take it or leave it, I just won PTA chief. But to me, it was such a contrast with Bush's, just the kind of attitude that Bush projects, because the night that Obama accepted won and had that speech, there was a sort of, he has a graveness to him, and gravitas, but it's even more like the word grave, I think, and a somberness, like he was kind of processing or had accepted the huge, just crushing degree of responsibility that came along with his office, and there was always something playful about Bush, which I think some people liked about him, but was insulting at times. After Katrina, you just say,
I think that's very fair.
We're not having a happy time right now. Turn that smile upside down, please.
The contempt for the press at the press conferences and such, They stretch. I think you're right. Also, Obama, one reason why Obama may be projecting, there are many different images Obama projects. I mean, if you look at any newsstand, you'll see him there projecting the cool, suave Obama, the Kennedy 2 Obama, which is, then there's the fitness Obama, which in itself, this idea of all the publicity surrounding his trips to the gym is actually a huge kind of, lesson in leadership, when we have all these people who aren't exercising or whatever.
We got to get you doing PR for Obama.
Well, I'm trying to analyze him. I have to analyze him there because I think he's very conscious of that. And the other Obama is, what he was doing there, I think, in those speeches you mentioned, is he's beginning the huge process of dialing back the expectations that have been placed on him. And his supporters seriously believe he's going to solve the world's problems. And he's not going to solve the world's problems. He may make progress on a few of them, but he's not going to solve them. And he needs to start beginning to dial back. And I think that's why you saw in that speech on election night, for beginners, him saying it may not even be one term before we see a turnaround on this stuff. And I think there you're seeing kind of very preliminary framework for the re-election campaign, which will be, we're making progress, we got to stay the course. So there's Obama's, that will be Obama's slogan.
Stay the course.
In 20. Stay the course, exactly. And but we have a few minutes left, and it would be ironic. Yeah. We have a few minutes left, and I know you wanted to talk at length, but this just make it a somewhat, kind of a shorter, briefer, a pithier discussion, if you will, on the future of the Grand Old Party. And where do you see that future headed, Eve?
Well, turn that question back at you. I mean, where do I see it headed? I guess,
what's the mood at the New Republic offices? That's what I've been.
It's glee. It's
glee.
Unadulterated.
You guys are dancing in the halls. Pom-poms.
We went on the PA, and somebody sang "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead," and et cetera, et cetera. No, but insofar as I have an interest in a viable and kind of vibrant opposition movement to the Democrats and conservatism that makes some kind of sense and is coherent. I mean, where do I see it going? I guess temporarily, when I look at the freshmen, so we've been talking about the Democratic freshmen, and they've gotten a lot more attention because there's so many of them. But there are GOP freshmen, too, amazingly. I think there were 16 of them in 06 over the course of the 110th that came in, and now there's something like 10 or I don't know what. And I did it as an exercise once. I basically calculated the average rating that these freshmen got. So this is the 06 freshmen from the American Conservative Union, and where 100 is the very best. You know, you're a total movement winger. You're way conservative. We love you. And 0 is your George McGovern. And and I also calculated the average rating of the Republicans who were retiring this year. And the average rating of the Republicans who were retiring was something like 78. So essentially in the middle between centrism and conservatism. As you know, this is obviously unscientific, and the average rating of the freshmen was, I believe, 99.
Right.
And you know, you can take votes when you're a retiring member that you know you're not going along with your party. It's easier to do that. There was a way I took account for that, but you know, I think it did reveal that the center of gravity within Republicanism, you know, the Republicans within Congress, and I don't know if this is the same thing as a conservative movement outside of it, is moving rightward. And to me, that's not necessarily surprising, but it doesn't bode that well either. But I'd be curious what you think, and particularly you wrote that that you were distressed, or that it was a distressing fact that Obama's coalition looked kind of like a mini America, and that the McCain's coalition looked like old white dudes in VFW hats. So
that's right.
I
don't think I attached emotional resonance to this observation, but it is true. It is true that if you look at the composition of Obama's voters, it's more or less the composition of the United States of America. That is, 2/3 of Obama's voters were whites, and about 1/3 were minorities. And that's, of course, the composition of the United States. 2/3 of our population are white, and then 1/3 is minorities. Then you look at the GOP, and the only cohort that McCain won were 65 and older, and they're whites. And they're old white people. They're not even necessarily rich people, because Obama won, amazingly, voters who make more than $250K a year. So they clearly are not voting in their economic interest, a la Thomas Frank, because they want to see their taxes go up, I guess. Regardless, those are the two coalitions, and that's where American politics stands at the moment. One reason why the GOP caucus is becoming more conservative is that the center has moved to the Democratic Party. The center has shifted left. That's where it is now.
So are Republicans just looking at like a very, very long wilderness? Or it seems like when you locate some of these problems that the GOP has within demographics, it's like it's going to take a lot, appealing to African Americans as a conservative doesn't happen.
Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, I don't think that will happen again. I mean, I don't think it's feasible for the GOP, which hasn't won. You know, the last time the GOP won the African American vote was in the 50s, I believe. So it hasn't won the African American vote then, and now Barack Obama, the first black president, is a Democrat. Who has now been elevated in many people's eyes in the African American communities as the equivalent. If you look at the T-shirts that people wear, he is the equivalent of Martin Luther King Jr. I don't think it's foreseeable, in our lifetimes, actually, that the Republicans will ever win the African American vote. Hispanic vote is slightly different. They did vote, Hispanics and Asians both voted 2-to-1 Obama, so 66, 33, Obama, McCain, at about the same level as the 18 to 30 demographic. The young people voted 2-1 Obama. Those are typically they're swing demographics, and the problem is this. That's where the electorate is now. The electorate rejected Bush Republicanism. There's no argument about that.
Yep.
Will Obama be a successful president? If he is a successful president, in my view, he stands a strong chance of claiming a majority of those groups for a long time. Yeah, everything changes. That's a fact of life. But I think he could really sink the Democratic Party's teeth into those groups that I mentioned, the youth, Latinos, and Asians, for a long time. If he is an unsuccessful president, which is a possibility, then the center will shift back to the Republicans as a natural opposition, and you'll see inroads made in those groups. Again, I don't think you'll ever see in our lifetimes inroads made with African Americans. That's just the natural way of things.
So you would define...
Now, I don't think Obama is going to be an unsuccessful president. So that kind of gives you a hint of where...
So the nail's in the coffin.
More or less for the time being. Because what you see is, Paul Krugman wrote that book, which has just been reissued, The Return of Depression Economics.
Yep.
But I think it's about time we start thinking about the return of depression politics. And as I recall, I wasn't alive, obviously, but as I recall from the history books, the Republican Party and the conservative movement were not a very effective political force during the Great Depression. I'm not saying we're entering into the Great Depression, but we're entering into a period that superficially, in terms of economic policy, as Krugman points out, resembles it. And I think the politics of it will resemble it as well, which is that people are just so scared, they're frightened or panicked. They're just going to look to the government and, the party, a conservative party that is oppositional and, more concerned about Obama's birth certificate than about trying to solve the public policy problems at hand won't be a very effective force.
So, just, maybe my last question to you. If you were John Boehner,
I'd have a great tan.
You have a much deeper tan, for one.
I have a much better tan. I'm a pale, pasty writer. Yeah, I would.
And
I'd be smoking a lot more.
Yeah. Say you were him, So, but you have the analysis of this situation that you've just put forward. What do? You just twiddle your thumbs and wait for Obama to maybe screw up, but you don't think he will on the macro level, or just resign yourself to 12 years in the wilderness, or what? Is there anything that you could
I don't.
do?
Yeah, well, you have to wait for politics to take shape, and that's why we're in a weird period now, because nothing, a lot is happening in the world, but not coming from the Obama White House. So the Beltway battles aren't starting. You accept that you've just had a huge defeat. You accept that it's going to take a long time to rebuild the majority. Excuse me. But you also, I think, take some lessons from the Democrats. That a lot of people are talking about how the Republican Party needs to look to the Cameron Tories as a way to rebuild.
Right.
I think they have a much better example right here at home, the Democratic Party, which, it took 20 years. But on the one hand, you had a figure like Clinton, who, was adopting some parts of the conservative agenda, but also forwarding a vision of, his kind of effective government liberalism, you could put it. And who, never won a majority of the vote, but was elected president twice. And then you have kind of the Bush Democrats, the Bush Democratic Party, which is also a very effective model in some sense, because they were always looking at poll numbers, and their policies were always judged on the strength of the president at a given moment. They were fine, they were pursuing their little battles in Congress when Bush was popular. They would find ways to oppose him or whatnot. But they were very keen. Chuck Schumer understands polling, and he's very keen about those numbers. And once Bush fell under 50%, it began. The war began. Total opposition, investigations, a full-on assault. And that weakened the presidency further, in my view, the Bush presidency. So that was very effective. The third thing is you start having a 50-state strategy. I mean, the Republican Party is not going to be a majority party if it's limited to Appalachia, the South, and the Great Plains states.
The poor old people.
or old people.
Yeah.
And
that's just
so you have to start...
is their inability to me... And, I'm sure that they'll start turning this around, but the Republicans' inability to run candidates that are as well adapted to their districts as the Democrats have run. I mean, partly it's candidates are more interested in running as a Democrat now than as a Republican because you're going to have more power when you get into power. But, there seems to be no effort to really reach into any areas that they don't currently hold, to run more moderate candidates, the right kind of candidates in more moderate, exurban, suburban districts,
That's right. And I think that's a consequence of the conservative movement's hold on the Republican Party apparatus. And listen, liberalist interest groups control a lot of the Democratic Party too. I'm not denying that, but the Democratic Party also has Rahm Emanuel's and Chuck Schumer's to tell the interest groups, take a hike. I want to run Bob Casey in Pennsylvania.
He doesn't say take a hike, though. I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, he doesn't. I'm doing the G-rated version of the conversations. Schumer tells Kim Gandy of Now, I want to run Bob Casey. I'm sorry that you have a problem with it. He's going to be the candidate. Get over it. And what happens? He wins. He trounces Santorum in 2006, and the Democrats have a congressional majority. And that same, what the GOP needs, in my view, are politicians who will say to the Club for Growth, say to the Conservative Caucus, do you want to be purists, or do you want to win by winning seats in the Northeast where the people just they're not they're probably pro-life, but they don't want to reverse Roe. They see those measures as radical. So we need to take a new approach. It's not the most important
thing to them.
Or it's not the most important thing to them. So, do you want to be purists, or do you want to be a majority party? And the fact of the matter is, in my view, is that a lot of them want to be purists. They don't want to win. They've had a good run. They won a lot, and so now they just are content to be purists. And that means that there's going to be a long time in the wilderness for the GOP.
It's a pleasing feeling to feel like you're always in the moral right. There's no tough questions. The answer to everything is lower spending,
And also, it's hard to compete when the opposition is on steroids.
True. It's an unfair. We needed anti-doping agencies.
And in your face, yeah.
All right.
So I guess I'll leave it there if that's all right with you. We got to go eat the turkey. So.
Well, let me just say that I hope Obama finds it in his heart to give some of his loaves to you this Thanksgiving.
I do too. Yes.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
This has been great. All right?
Yep. Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Bye.